She made him sit down and said, now listen to this podcast, the whole thing. Listen to it.
This particular curse was written on clay bowls and then smashed so that it couldn't never be undone. But it can be. By recognizing a pattern, then we can through will can overcome these patterns.
He starts talking about what he called monkeys with human heads that climbed through the window and scared him so bad that he didn't even want to talk about it.
From east of the Mississippi, investigating the unknown. Welcome to the Sixth Sensory Podcast. This is the new age of pirate radio. This is the last vestige of the outlaw.
There's a archaeological component to this also, with the old artifacts from the old pagan world stored inside of this mountain. They had those techniques to move big megaliths.
These legends, they come out of a reality, but it's a spiritual reality that we've so shut down to.
I'm excited about this one today. My guest is someone I've been looking forward to talking with. He's working on a book. He's also a podcast host. Justin Brown from the Prometheus Lens podcast. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Tim, thank you for having me, man. I'm excited to talk to you. I love some good conversations and dialogue.
Same. That's what keeps me in the game. That's what keeps me doing this. You hit rough patches sometimes and you think about hanging it up, but when I have a show like this, it kind of reminds me of why I'm podcasting, because I've heard your show. I've actually known about your show for a little while. I caught you early on. I think I heard about you from Bo Kennedy on AI once upon a time when that was a running show. He shouted you out and he was like, "Oh, you got to go listen to this guy." So I actually paused the show and I went and I found your podcast so I wouldn't forget to do it later. So
that's awesome. I listened to that and I loved that conversation too. And I was like, dude, I'd love to be in on that one. And I was just listening, and all of a sudden he was like, "Have you guys talked to Justin Brown from Prometheus Lens? You need to talk to him." And I was like, "Oh yes, thank you, Bo."
Yeah. So that's how long I've been listening. And I want to say, when I went and found your show, you only had a couple posted, but I might be wrong.
Yeah, I just hit the year mark, so it's like I got like 50 something episodes, I think, right now.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask you something, but maybe we should stay on talking about your show. I'll get to that later. I was going to ask you something about, because I like your take on scripture, but I'll ask you about it later. I don't think I know how you got into podcasting.
Yeah, that was like we was kind of talking pre-roll. I was a guy that grew up in church my whole life. And of course, I mean, I had the rebellious stage once I got 16 and got the keys and stuff, keys to the car. But I always had that foundation, but I was always obsessed with history and the Bible. So I was that little kid that was even 7, 8 years old, asking all these questions during Sunday school. And so with that and my love of history, that led into mythology and stuff like that. I was never like a straight A student. I mean, I was a C plus average guy because it was just, I didn't apply myself, but I really did love mythology and history and the Bible, and never really liked to read any of that stuff. But in 2012, I just happened to stumble across a Trey Smith video from God in a Nutshell. And he was talking about the astral realm and angels breeding with the daughters of men and making these hybrid Nephilim giants, and just all this, wackadoo stuff, I thought. And I was like, man, this guy, I wrote my Bible. That's not in the Bible. So then I cracked open the book, and started going through it and looking, and And I'm like, oh my God, this stuff was like staring me right in my face my whole life. And I just looked over it because I was relying so much on my teachers. I heard Genesis 6 told, a couple times in my years at church, but it was the good line of Seth breeding with the bad line of Cain and made spiritually wicked people. And so when I got exposed to this stuff, he introduced me to, Dr. Aaron Judkins and Derek Gilbert and Michael Heiser. And when I started reading and finding all this stuff, man, it was just uh like a fire underneath me. I couldn't get enough of it. And it was like the thing that I already loved was so much more deeper than I ever thought. And there was so much more that I didn't know. So it was just like I had to know. So I just deep dive studied, man, just reading everything I could get my hands on, starting in 2012. And then in 22, I was like, I started doing like little videos on Facebook. Just started, setting my phone out and talking about some of the stuff I'd found. And I was like, man, that'd be really cool to do like a show or something like that. But I talked myself out of it. But I ended up inviting like 15, maybe 20 people that was in my friend circle and that I went to church with just to have like men's group, just guys hang out, have a couple beers, eat some good barbecue maybe, and talk about all this cool, weird stuff in the Bible. And we had 3 meetings and we covered the Michael Heiser's three rebellions. And after 3 meetings, my buddy Steve's like, man, this is some pretty profound stuff here. We should be recording this stuff. He's like, I got a brother that's got a podcast and can teach us everything we need to know. I think it would be fun and we can open a lot of people's eyes. So that was, 2 years ago. So 2 years ago and two podcasts later, here we are.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah, well, I'm glad you started. I mean, you've got a very unique podcast. I like that you don't hold back and you kind of just go straight into some of these more, I guess some people would call them fringe. I'm so comfortable with this stuff now. It's just like, I just can't see things any other way. Like the supernatural worldview it's, for me, it's that or bust at this point. I just, I mean, but, before I got into this stuff, your story resonates with me because I heard about Gen 6 every now and again in church, and it was only like a 10-minute portion of the sermon if it was ever brought up at all. And also, I don't think they usually had a weird kind of a way of like icing over it and making it really boring, and it just never really made sense. It didn't click to me. And
Hmm.
so it didn't. I always had this very manila view of scripture. I used to be just a crazy person, just playing music, running wild, not spiritual at all. And especially when I hit 20 years old, none of this stuff made sense to me. I didn't want to be like church people, um, because I didn't see a reason why. But when I came across this supernatural worldview and the book of Enoch, it all changed for me and things just clicked.
Yeah, that was me. It was like a bridge gap because where I was fascinated with it as a little kid, I remember I was like, David and Goliath, this was a really giant dude, and the king was afraid of him, and this whole army wouldn't come after him. Is there anything more to this? I just, I had this curiosity. And then the same thing, it's just the trading of Esau's birthright, reading that, without my supernatural lens. Even then, I was like, this doesn't make any sense to me. This guy was going to inherit everything, and he just throws it away. So, and then the flood, how can a loving God destroy all of humanity? And just all these questions that I had as a kid once I got this supernatural worldview and started discovering all these things, it was like that rainbow bridge that went into Asgard, man. I mean, it got me there, and I just seen this whole new world.
Yeah. Yeah, I think if you and I can exist enough to have this conversation, so can other intelligences. And that's what I'm coming to find is that it's not just there's good and evil, and I think there's a war going on. And but I don't think it's just God and the devil. I think there's other. I think it's like that old Rolling Stones song, "Sympathy for the Devil." You if you follow the main character in that song, he shows up at different moments in history. I was there when
Hmm.
Jesus, and because he's a supernatural entity who meddles in human affairs, and I think there's a lot more of that going on than most people will admit or even recognize. I think there's all other entities that it's not just Satan, and there are others. There those other gods mentioned in the Bible are not just wood and stone idols in somebody's house.
Yeah.
That's been a big thing for me lately. But what got me there was Genesis 3:15, Genesis 6, and reading the book of Enoch. And that was like a key that opened up this door to understanding
Hmm.
the world.
Yeah. And Deuteronomy 32
Yeah.
was another one of mine. Reading that and how that was a retelling of Babel. And it really expands this Sunday school story of God busting up the languages. It was like, not only did he bust up the languages, it says that he divided the peoples amongst the sons of God. And in the Hebrew, that's B'nai Ha Elohim. That's the same phrase used in Genesis 6. And every time we have many translations in English that translate to sons of God, but it is not B'nai Ha Elohim. But every single time in the Hebrew language, that B'nai Ha Elohim is talking about an angelic race. And these are the divine council, which you see in the Greek mythology. These are the many gods in this council that makes decisions and rules over the nations and stuff. And that answers a lot of questions like atheists try to attack our faith with. And I think that that is a really good shield in our spiritual battle with other entities and people, trying to bring them to the truth and to the light. Because a lot of people will say, if your God is real, he's a shitty God. Because look at all the war, the famine, the rape, and all the atrocities. If this God of yours is real, he sucks at his job. And it's like, no, 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 no. You don't have the Deuteronomy 32 worldview,
Yeah.
and that's scriptural. The
Well,
reason why it's so shitty is because of these fallen entities that are ruling over the nations and pulling the strings of all the world leaders and influencing.
yeah, absolutely. That just pulled the car up and parked it right where I was going to ask you earlier about some scripture and I've got it here, but I've been about, I think late last year, sometime I decided to read through the Bible all the way through. I made it up to Psalms recently, and something told me to go back and read Deuteronomy because I kept having these thoughts about stuff that I had read in Deuteronomy. So I wanted to go back and make sure I read what I thought I read. So I just went back and read through Deuteronomy again. And this whole divine council thing just really just smacked me in the face this time. So I went back to Psalms, and I'm in Psalms right now, and I got to Psalms 82. I saw it again,
Yep.
but then I'm in Psalms 89, and I see it again, and it's 6 through, well, this whole passage, but it starts with 6, and it says, uh, "For who in the skies can be compared to the Lord? Who among the heavenly beings is like the Lord? A God feared in the council of the holy ones, great and awesome, and he is above all that are around him." And then it says he's the Lord God of hosts, and it just makes all these references to these other, I don't know what to call them, but uh, that's exactly what we're talking about here. What I want to ask you about, though, is this next part. It goes into, in verse 10, it says, "You crushed Rahab like a carcass, and you scattered your enemies with your mighty arm." And I remember in Job, there was a reference to Rahab, and it's in the context of like space or the heavens. So it seems like that might be a planet. And I was going to ask your opinion on
Yeah.
that.
And see, with that is, and that's not something I've deep dived yet, but I actually just bought David Flynn's collection where he goes into Mars and that whole theory that he has on Rahab, and
Right.
that's what influenced Timothy Alberino's viewpoint. I just went to a conference recently, and he was talking about it, and he was like, "Guys, I cannot recommend enough that you check out David Flynn's work." He said that was one of the most influential books that I've read. He said it changed my life. He said, and opened up a whole new world to scripture. So I was like, well, if he's saying that, I need to check it out myself. But I've heard him speak on it, and his theory was that Rahab was once a planet, and I can't remember the two planets, but there's a space where a planet should be, but it's just a huge busted up asteroid belt.
Mhm.
And so it appears like at one time there might have been a planet there and it got destroyed. And he said that's what that verse and stuff is talking about. And I think that's a pretty interesting idea. My only like pause with it is like it makes it look like they outsmarted God. And it's like they knew they were on this planet and that was home base, and God goes to crush it and destroy it, but then they teleport off world and
Mhm.
miss God's judgment. So I mean that was kind of like but like I said, I've not read the book and seen he might have an answer to all that.
Yeah.
But
I mean, it
my
says
original thought was it was the chaos monster, the chaos
Tiamat.
dragon. Yeah, because if you look,
Yeah.
scripture constantly takes Middle Eastern religion and mythology and stuff like that and basically reappropriates it. And they put Yahweh at the head and show his supremacy through the retelling of their stories and reappropriating them. And a lot of it's hidden in the Hebrew. You don't see it unless you look into the Hebrew. Like in Genesis, where God's spirit hovers over the waters, he hovers over the Tehom
Hmm.
in Hebrew. And Tehom, that's a cognate of Tiamat.
Hmm.
And in the Enuma Elish, Marduk is the hero, and he uses his strong right arm to destroy Tiamat, and he busts her into pieces and creates the universe and the world with her pieces. So when I read that mythology story, and then I heard this mention in Job of Rahab, and basically it was the Leviathan sea monster. Can you grab it by the nose and pull it and do as thou wilt and all this stuff? And then it mentions the busting up of Rahab into pieces. That was always, my thought. It was kind of like a retelling or reappropriation of the creation story with Marduk and Tiamat. But like I said, his Tim's speaking of that in David Flynn's book, it was enough to get me to purchase the book. I've just not read it yet.
Yeah. I, I've come across Tiamat as well, and just the waters, like it goes back to Genesis where it says, what does it say? The God separated the waters.
Yeah.
So I can't figure out if Tiamat was like a water planet or that was inhabited by dragons, and like this entity was like using the dragons, like coming through them, or it gets, there's a lot of different ways you could probably take that. It depends on, I guess, the myth, the version that you're reading. And I wonder if Tiamat was another name for this planet, because I think that the Sumerians have they have that map of the cosmos, or somehow they knew about our solar system. They knew about all the planets, and the Sumerians have an extra planet though, and they called it Tiamat.
Hmm. That's pretty wild. And
So
that would make sense.
yeah, so there's either way, we've got a missing planet here, and we got an asteroid belt there now where a planet should be.
And I've even heard some people talk about they referred to it as Gabriel's fist,
Okay.
and that it was an instrument of God's judgment, and that was what triggered the Great Deluge. That
Oh.
the pieces that he busted up had eventually, God had used them to throw them into earth and cause these rifts and earthquakes and the great cataclysm that caused the waters from the abyss to burst forth. Because that's what one thing a lot of people get hung up on. They talk about Noah's flood. they get hung up on the just the water that's coming down. But when you read that, it says that not only did the waters come down from above, it says the waters from the abyss burst forth. And if you've not read or looked into, I really highly suggest that you check out Dr. Walt Brown and his hydroplate theory. To me, that answers so many questions. And he worked for NASA. He wasn't just some schmuck off the street picking stuff out of his back pocket and just throwing out ideas. But like in a nutshell, he was saying that he believed that Earth was like Pangea, one supercontinent, and then some kind of catastrophic event happened, whether it was an asteroid like Gabriel's Fist or a comet or an earthquake, something, some kind of great cataclysm happened, and it caused the Pangea to separate. And if you get into the Bible, even Peleg, and you look at that in the Hebrew, that means he was named that because during his time, that's when the lands were divided. And he talks about the oceanic ridge. If you look today, this oceanic ridge wraps around the globe like the seam of a baseball. And every single major mountain range in the world, without exception, lines up perfectly parallel with this oceanic ridge because that's where they were all pushed apart. And then when they met resistance, they just buckled. And like a car hood hitting a concrete wall, it buckles up.
Yeah.
And then he said that the plate sliding caused the volcanoes to erupt, great earthquakes, the soot and ash from the volcanoes, darkened the sky, lowering the temperatures on Earth, bringing the first ice age, and like all the debris that got flung up into the atmosphere that was not strong enough to get propelled out, come down and buried everything. That's how you get the fossil record. But there was quite a bit that escaped the atmosphere. And he said he thinks that's why you see so many pelts on the new side of the moon, because just from this catastrophic event, it just beat the hell out of the moon.
Yeah, like,
So,
okay. So what was I missed this part. What was the original catastrophe though? Was it Mars exploding or was it a water planet explode? You described
yeah,
what happened perfectly, but what was the first thing that happened?
and that's what he was saying in his book. He said he wasn't sure. He said he knew
Ah,
it was his idea or theory that some kind of great cataclysm happened to
okay.
spring this forward, whether it was a comet or an asteroid or or just a anomaly of an earthquake. But he said there was something that had to trigger it all off. But I
Yeah.
loved how because he even tied in the young Adrias
Okay.
because he said after this happened, he said all the smoke and ash and soot that darkened the sky, it brought the first ice age. He said then, 1,000 years or a certain amount of time passed, and that people started re-civilizing the earth and repopulating the earth. He said, and people, they settle on coastlines. They build their cities on coasts. He said, so after a certain amount of time, uh, the ice caps started to melt, raising the water levels. He said, then at the same time, this is newly formed land that's not settled into the bedrock yet. So this new land starts to settle and go down at the same time, ice caps melting and raising the water levels. That's why you have so many sunken cities to this day. But that book he's got is called In the Beginning. And I've not read it cover to cover yet,
Yeah.
but I've listened to him talk about it and read some sections in the book. It's really fascinating.
Yeah, that is. And I think I said Mars exploding a second ago. And what I meant was Mars being affected by an explosion because I've read up on some of this stuff too, and it kind of parallels what you're saying here in this guy's work. There was a guy, I think he worked at NASA, and he was studying Mars, and he found that Mars poles had suddenly shifted. And now that planet is positioned in a way that it wasn't originally. And they even went so far as to look at the face on Mars and those pyramids, and they think that those may have been at one time right on the pole or right on one of the like equator lines or something like a significant spot on the planet is where those were placed, and that face on Mars was facing Earth originally, and whatever happened knocked Mars to another you know, it's
Yeah.
hanging in a different way now. So, but something would have happened. Oh, and there's craters on Mars, like what you're saying with the moon. They also found craters on one side of Mars, indicating that something exploded and just showered that one side of the planet with debris.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess
Like
we're
a
back.
shotgun.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Exactly. I mean, man, I just like I don't know. I this is how I see the world now. It's like I'm leaving room for possibilities in my spirituality now for all these bigger ideas like a cosmic war, like a planet exploding. And it's like once I just accept that maybe this kind of stuff happened, things just start to make sense. And I mean, like this verse, this chapter, Psalm 89, like there's one other spot in here I thought it was interesting. It talks about Rahab, and then it goes into, it says, the north and the south, you created them. Tabor and Hermon joyously praise your name. And I just think it's interesting that they decided to throw Mount Hermon in there
Mm-hmm.
because it seems like that mountain just has a lot of significance.
Oh yeah,
And I don't
definitely.
know if there's, how, scripture is like it's like coded. It's almost like an onion or something. Like
Yeah.
you can find new meanings, several different meanings for one verse. So I'm still I'm trying to find out why they put Mount Hermon in this chapter. I just have a feeling it's significant because that might go into actually your book because the Watchers in Genesis 6 come down to Earth at Mount Hermon. This is where they um, had an exchange with the men of Earth. They wanted human women, and they gave
Yeah.
the
Ground
fathers,
zero.
yep, technology. And that's how we get the Nephilim. And I don't know if your
Mm.
book goes into that, but I know you go into Esau. And I think that Esau fits into this somehow as well.
Yeah, I do too. And I tell people, because some people do that, they get worked up if you say
Oh, yeah.
something that's against the cultural norm or the teaching norm, even if it's not salvational, even if it's not something that changes the doctrine of the faith. uh my thoughts and theories on this subject are very different than traditional thought. Some people can hear that and be like, have an open mind and be like, that makes sense. And then that does answer a lot of questions. You might be onto something. But then I have certain people that's just like, this is blasphemous. You're reading too much into it, and I'm unsubscribing from your channel. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And, and I'm the type of person, the more I've studied, the more I've read, the deeper that my faith has went and studying these things. These things have only solidified my faith and drew me closer to God. And we have to remember that we worship God. And I've said this before, and this is something else that ruffles some feathers. I worship God, the creator of this universe. I don't worship a text. And I think a lot of Christians worship a text. I think the Bible is the divine inspired word of God, but it doesn't have the answers for everything. It doesn't have all the historical things that happened throughout, you know, since the time of creation. This is a book that tells where the faith came from, how it progressed, and their beliefs of the high points of our creation and our fall and our redemption. So it's like when you get people talking about the gap theory,
Mhm.
some people get bent plumb out of shape. It's not in there. You're making this up. And it's like, just because it's not in there doesn't mean it didn't happen. And if you go into some of this original language, it's like it says that God makes nothing null and void. And it said that he, you know, reestablishes earth. and reconstitutes it when you get into like the Hebrew language there and the verbiage. And then you get to the great flood. He promises Noah that never again will he destroy the earth with water. So it's like, why did he say again if this was the first time?
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
not anything that, I'm dogmatic about, that I'm willing to build my cross and die on that hill, but it's like we have to have our minds open enough to look into these things, ask these questions, and see how they tie in, and if they answer a lot of loose-ended and ambiguous stuff in the scripture.
Yeah. I do kind of lean towards the gap theory now, because to think that it was done in a week, that's kind of like us putting our understanding of time onto God. Time might be totally different to a divine being.
Mm,
They might not even be in the third dimension. Time is just
yeah.
totally different up in wherever they're at. Especially if they're not in the third dimension, time is definitely, if you study physics, you realize once you get out of that third dimension, once you get into the fourth and the fifth and so on, time is going to act differently. So to be dogmatic about the earth being created in 7 days, that's us kind of projecting our ideas of time onto an all-knowing divine entity, a creator God.
And yeah, and my whole thing with even being open to it is because it's kind of like the Star Wars movies. You see Darth Vader and he's just inherently evil. You don't get the backstory to why
Yeah.
he was evil. There's always a why and a backstory thing. So when we start at the creation, it says that let us make man in our image. That's plural language. I don't believe God was, an egomaniac or psychotic talking to himself. He was talking to his divine counsel, which according to the book of Job says was there at the side of creation and sang for joy at the sight of it. So they are our elder brothers. And then here we have the garden, Adam and Eve, this new creation. And a lot of people miss it. I mean, there's day 6 people. It says, let us make man in our image. So that there they go. They're already made and put into the earth. But then later, it says Adam and Eve was created. Adam was pulled from the dust of the ground. It's kind of like Adam and Eve was his pet project. It was like it was an answer or a response to a thing. And then you have their Darth Vader, Satan, the Nakash, and he's got a chip on his shoulder about this new creation and tries to deceive it and overthrow it and cast it down. Well, if you tie in a gap theory, if there was some kind of intergalactic war and Satan and some of his other brothers ruled over the earth, had their own offspring and had dominion over it, then all of a sudden there was a war, was destroyed, and then it was recreated and given to this new race, that would give him a whole lot of motive to be pissed off and want to rebel and do the things that he did. I mean, it does supply a motive.
Yeah, I want to remind people too that nothing you just said challenges the doctrine of Christ.
No, no. And that's something that's what I was trying to say is I could be completely wrong or be 100% right. It changes nothing of the story of salvation and the doctrine of our faith.
Yeah, I think there's more going on there behind the scenes with Genesis. You kind of do have to read between the lines a little bit. I mean, even when Cain kills Abel and he goes off and starts his own kind of group of people, he joins up with another civilization. But it's
Mm-hmm.
weird because his parents are Adam and Eve. Who else is on the earth for him to go join up with? I even think it says in one version he went to find cities or a city. So I
Yeah.
guess I think Heidi told me the other day that people were calling that the Genesis 6 people. So when you add
Yeah,
in
the
the
day
okay,
six
day 6
people.
people. Yeah, yeah. So that's another thing. It's like when you look at that, clearly he went and met up with some group of something to procreate with. So that
Yep.
shows you right there that there's more to the story than you're being told at face value. You have to read between the lines. You have to leave some room for this story to kind of breathe a little bit.
Yeah, the truth is in the margins.
Yes. Yes, I found that verse too in Job about Rahab. It says the establishment of the heavens are pulverized and stunned at God's rebuke. With his power, he quiets the roaring, and by his wisdom, he shatters Rahab. And it says the heavens are pulverized and stunned.
Hmm.
That sounds like something like an
Yeah.
explosion was involved. I don't know.
And it goes back to the calming of the water. You know, it says
Mm,
the calming there, the sea. That's what happened at the beginning in Genesis. It says when the Spirit of God hovered over the deep, the Tehom, Tiamat, and then you have it again with Jesus when they're on the boat. The storm comes. That they're symbolically in the midst of chaos, and this huge storm starts raging, and he gets up, and it's once again symbolically placing Marduk under his feet because Marduk had to have all these special weapons, had to do all this great battle, and it was not an easy ordeal or task. But it's like Jesus and the Holy Spirit at creation just steps out and puts their hand out just like a dog, down boy, and conquers and subdues chaos.
yeah. Yeah, incredible. This is the kind of stuff that gets me excited about spirituality now. I'll just put it under that blanket term of spirituality because like I said, I used to not really care. Things just didn't make sense. Uh, I used to think that people believed the Bible just for the sake of believing the Bible, just so they had something to kind of latch onto, and that they were I thought that people were like kind of self-propelling their beliefs forward just because
That's
I
how
don't
he's
know.
raised.
Yeah,
That was the
because of
religion they were born into.
yeah,
And
yeah, social nurture, nature, all that stuff. But now that I see that there's answers in this book that explain this reality that we're in. They don't tell you every little thing, but there are answers in this book that explain things and make things make way more sense. Now I get it. Now I understand uh why I call myself a Christian at the end of the day.
yep. And not everybody is into seeking and finding all these breadcrumb trails and finding
Sure.
these, people like us, we're treasure hunters, man.
Yeah,
Granted, not everybody's like that,
that's true.
but the ones that are don't need to be discouraged by those who don't want to seek out this higher knowledge and these things that are foundation stones for the faith. And I find that a lot of people try to discourage them and be like, ah, Book of Enoch and all that stuff you're talking about, it's useless. It's a waste of time. The only thing that matters is Christ, and you're wasting your time. And it's like, man, most of the people that are in this movement are in one of two camps. Either they're already saved and have that foundation in Christ, but they're treasure hunters, man. They want to find as much as they can because that gives them a thrill that draws them closer, something they can see, feel, and touch and taste of their faith instead of just blind faith. And then the other camp are the seekers, the ones that are not Christians yet, but they know there's something out there and they're trying to find those proof nuggets so they can make their commitment. So in both situations is for the glory of the kingdom. You shouldn't be discouraging those type of people and digging into those things. And I can't remember what psalm it was, but it's one of my favorite ones. It says, it is the glory of God to conceal a thing, but it's the glory of kings to search things out.
I love that one. I identify with that verse. I really do.
Yeah.
And you're right. It's okay if people aren't fired up about this stuff in the way that we are. Not everybody, I guess, is meant to go this deep into, maybe some of the more esoteric stuff. For me, it just makes total sense to dive into this. And I think a lot of it goes back to like pre-roll. You mentioned getting red pilled, and you kind of alluded to your journey and stuff like that. And that kind of happened for me in 2020. And I knew that I was being lied to. And so I had all these thoughts going through my head, but I also was like in a weird place where I'm like, why am I here? Why, you know, what's the point of this? And I really kind of made up my mind that I was going to start looking for answers for once and for all in my life. I was going to start looking into, why is there a God? Even though I was a Christian, I was just in that place where I'm like, I need to know more definitively that there is a God, and 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 everything else that follows with that. And when I decided that I was going to kind of start really buckling down and looking for answers, that's when all this stuff started coming up to my doorstep. This supernatural worldview, the seed war of Genesis 3:15, the Watchers and the Nephilim of Genesis 6. Then
Mm.
I got smacked in the face with the book of Enoch. I went back and read that, and I was like, oh, this is what I was looking for.
Yep.
And it's like, it just kind of, once I made up my mind that I wanted to know more, that's when I got more.
Yep. Yeah, once you
Yeah.
started seeking, that's what it
Yeah.
says, knock and the door shall be opened, ask and it'll be given to you, seek and you shall find. And it's amazing because I talk about, I call all these little hidden things that I find, I refer to them as gold nuggets. It's a treasure hunt, or they're puzzle pieces. And yeah, the people that are just, don't get excited to go on these treasure hunts, don't have to know all this other stuff. They're missing some puzzle pieces, but it still doesn't mean that they can't see the entire picture. They can see the picture. They know what it is. It's salvation. God made that so simple and so easy that even a child can understand it. But there's a few of us that's just like, man, there's 4 or 5 pieces missing here. Yeah, I know what it is, but it's killing me. I got to find those other pieces. And then when you read the book of Enoch and Jasher and Jubilees and start getting into the historical contexts and the minds of the people that this ancient text was written by and written to, you find those pieces. And like I said, you might have a full overall picture of what this is. But then like the Last Supper, for instance, Leonardo da Vinci. Yeah, this is the Last Supper. Boom, there's Jesus in the center and the 12 apostles, but you might be missing that piece next to Judas's elbow. And then you find that and you plug that in and you're like, it's not changed. The overall picture's the same. But man, now I see that spilt jar of salt beside Judas's arm. And Leonardo da Vinci was signaling to everyone that Judas was a covenant breaker because people at that time made salt covenants. And yeah, that's something that if you didn't have that puzzle piece, it wasn't that big a deal. But for those of us that find that and put that in there, it makes that so much stronger. And
That's
that's just kind of how I
wow.
like to look at it.
I love that. I've never even heard that before. Wow.
Hmm.
And I know that he did that. I know Da Vinci was like that. He was encoding meaning and just codes essentially into his artwork. I mean, even in that Vitruvian Man, he had a scaled down version of the pyramids in the geometry of that Vitruvian Man drawing. He was, for I guess that was maybe a nod towards ancient technology or something like that. But he, for whatever reason, he put that in there. His stuff is full of those little gold nuggets, to use your term there. And man, I knew we were gonna have like a cool conversation today. Like, I even last night I went to bed thinking, just kind of, it was on my mind, I was going to have this interview today, and I had the weirdest dreams. I had a dream where I was chasing around a giant snake with a sword. Very realistic dream too. It sounds crazy to say it, but like, this snake would make eye contact with me, and it was huge. It could have taken me. And it's like every time the snake saw the resolve in my eyes for me to kill it, it would run away from me. It was crazy. And then at one point, like, I woke up and like I just had this word in my head. I heard like Nephilim, Nephilim, Nephilim. And I woke up this morning like, what was going on with these dreams? I'm like, oh yeah, I've got this interview today. So I don't know why I'm adding that into this episode, but I think this stuff can get under your skin a little bit.
Oh
And
yeah.
I don't know. I think we're on the same page too about Esau. I do want to bring that up because I think you've got a book in the works on that. And
Yeah.
yeah, I just, I think we're on the same page because I heard you on, I think it was Unfiltered Rise. It may have been another podcast, but when you got to that part about the the birth of Esau and Jacob and Esau coming out with the hairy cloak, when I was like, I totally agree with this guy because earlier this year, as I'm reading through the Bible, when I came to that verse, I stopped and I went and I found every translation I could find. I read through at least 20 different translations of that verse because I'm like, what is happening here? Why is he hairy or were his arms? Some pastors will say, oh, he just had hairy arms and hairy legs. But after I got through about 20 different translations, what I walked away with was the sense that this Esau was covered in hair like a little Sasquatch, like you said. And
Oh yeah.
that just kind of, I'll let you go more into that, but that opens up so many doors of, okay, what's happening here? And back to my dream, like having the serpents in my dream, does this tie into this Nephilim serpent seed somehow?
Yeah. And I think so too. And this book, I finished it. I'm in the middle of formatting it now to get it out, but it was a journey. It was just
Mm.
I stumbled across that verse and I was like, he was covered in hair from head to toe, like a hairy cloak. And I was like, that in our modern vernacular, if we saw this guy out in the woods, we would, without hesitation, say, I seen a Sasquatch, I seen a Bigfoot. And he's the only person in the Bible that's described this way. So he was a special person. And the ancient reader reading that would have definitely picked up on that. It wouldn't have been lost to them. And then as I started just going through, I started going through the book of Jasher and Jubilees and the Midrash and the Targums. And, some of those, are they divine inspired? No. But a lot of them are referenced in your 66 book canon. So that showed you the writers read it and, believed it, or in the very least was familiar with it. It was a part of their culture. I tell people 1,000 years from now, if somebody wrote the history of America and we get wiped out by some cataclysm and they find this history of America, but then they find a couple Sports Illustrated magazines or Cosmopolitan magazines, are those our quote unquote history books? No, but
Mm.
you're going to learn a hell of a whole lot about our culture, what we thought, what we believed, and what we were up to by reading those. And that's how I see a lot of these extra biblical books. It doesn't have to be divine inspired to be important for historical context. And those were all just puzzle pieces. And I just kept putting those pieces to the side, putting it to the side until finally I had this complete picture of this, enigmatic character named Esau. And what is so wild about it is this is spread out between, you know, all kinds of different writings and different people, but they weave in and out of each other like a perfect garment and tell this very complete story of this guy. And you get the whole serpent seed, which that's a red flag to a lot of people, but that tied in. And to me, it answered so many other questions. And once again, this is one of those theories that it does nothing to the doctrine of faith. It's not heresy if you're right or wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But some people get pretty bent out of shape over this because the establishment scholars and stuff laugh at it and say that it's not true. It can't be real. It's heresy. And there's also been racist organizations take this idea and this doctrine and pervert it and manipulate it to their own justification of genocide and racial hatred. So, the idea is that Cain was of the serpent seed, and the Ku Klux Klan, Adolf Hitler, some of these, organizations and powerful people that wanted the mass genocide of entire populations grabbed onto this doctrine and used it as their proof text and said, oh, we see there's a serpent seed. So they're born evil. They're born uh, with the destiny to go to hell, and they're born to throw us off course and destroy humanity. So therefore, they're not human. We can just kill them all. And that's not what I'm advocating for here. I think that there's some good, sound points to be made from this serpent seed doctrine that ties a lot of loose ends and answers a lot of ambiguous questions in the text if it pans out to be true. So it's like, just because someone bad takes a hold of an idea and twists it to their own wicked ends doesn't make the idea bad. It makes the application and perversion of that idea bad.
Yeah, and also too, I don't know that Hitler was taking his version of a serpent seed from the biblical text. I know that they were into a lot of different ancient books that kind of went into different origins of man, most of them centered around the north somewhere, like the ancient civilization of Hyperborea. They had some sort of an Atlantean civilization that existed 200,000 years ago. This is their dating that sunk into the ocean, and those people got out of there and they spread to Europe, and they went to Iran, and they thought some of them went to Tibet as well. So the Nazis were taking all this other mythology from these other, I guess you could say, more secular books, and they were just kind of
Amalgamating.
For sure. They were taking little bits and pieces from here and from there, and they're putting them all together, and they're building up this fantasy origin story. And I have come across them doing that. Like, they were always doing that, and they were into some really wild, I would call them old occult manuscripts to get some of this, to get these ideas. So that doesn't surprise me that they would latch onto the serpent seed and add
Because
that
later
in.
Aryans really did, because later on, the Aryans that come here to the United States that were more familiar with the Bible, when they heard about this doctrine, it was like you said, it was another piece to the puzzle, or another one they could grab as a proof text and be like, yeah, those Jews, they're the evil ones, because here you have these two seeds, and the Jews screwed Esau and Cain, the rightful eldest brothers and heir, and stole all the blessings and birthrights. They're the evil ones. Kill all the Jews.
Yeah.
So anything that they could grab onto that they could twist or pervert a little bit to justify their cause doesn't mean they're a Christian. It's just something that they can use to show they're right. They don't necessarily have to align with it,
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think too, and I'm not going to go super deep into this right now, but something I've found recently is you've got this story of Jacob and Esau. Jacob, later in life, his name actually becomes Israel. His descendants are the first Israelites. Esau, his brother, becomes Edom. His descendants are the first Edomites. And I can show you this later, but there's a strong case to be made that the German people come from the Edomites. There's an old group that the Nazis were kind of tracing their bloodline to, called Germania, out of northern Germany. And there's a lot of ties to the Edomites there. And of course, Israelites are the Jews. So this is a blood feud that goes back to the Bible. In World War II in the 1940s, it's very possible that you had a revival of this blood feud where you have the descendants of the Edomites going after the Israelites one last time to wipe them out.
And also too, like historically speaking, I found when I was doing all this research that Edomites was like an epithet or an allegory for anyone that was a adversary to God's people. They called the Romans Edomites several times. So it's like anybody that was a thorn in their side or an adversary, it was kind of like a catch-all epithet term that they would throw at people. Oh, they're our adversaries. They're Edomites. And when I got to looking through that, when I seen the birth of Esau, not only was, he covered in hair from head to toe like a hairy cloak, that was weird.
Yeah.
And then it says that when they were born, that Jacob had a hold of Esau's heel. And immediately I was like, Genesis 3:15. And that's the seed war verse. And when you go there, it says, I will put enmity between your seed, the woman, or the serpent, sorry, and thy seed, the woman. So there it said plainly, she would have a seed, he would have a seed, and they would be at enmity with one another. And it said, your seed shall bruise thy seed's head, but your seed will bruise the other's heel. So you got a bruising of a head and a bruising of a heel. And when you look at the birth, I think that if in fact Esau was a serpent seed, Satan stuck his hand in basically the womb and tried to flip it around to pervert this prophecy on its head, because that's what Satan does. He perverts things and flips them upside down. And there you have Esau's head, I'm sorry, Esau's foot pressing on Jacob's head, bruising the head, and then Jacob's hand grasping Esau's heel and bruising the heel. It's a perfect picture of Genesis 3:15.
Yep. There's a
And
reason why they use that word enmity for sure.
yeah,
They could have used
and
strife or any other conflict word, but they chose to use that word enmity.
and then when you look into Flavius Josephus, the Jewish historian, he was a well-educated man. He knew that he was writing this histories of the people and that it would be preserved and important. And he was a well-educated man. I think he chose his words very intentionally and with a lot of thought and contemplation. And when he describes the conflict between those two brothers, he uses the word enmity. So not only do you have a visual picture of Genesis 3:15 and that cursing with this birth, you also have a verbal affirmation from the Jewish historian. And I even said in the book, whether it is physically real, like if Esau truly was a serpent seed, or just the people of that time painted him in that light and or believed him to be. It's one of those two.
Yeah. So it seems to me that with those two, with Jacob and Esau, of course, they come to represent these two nations of people here. And for some reason, of course, Esau looks very different. He's not very human like. So I'm very curious about what that was really all about. Because there seems to be like a purposeful dichotomy here. Like it seems like something more is happening here. Do you think that God is letting, this is maybe out there, but do you think that God is like letting Nakash have his own kingdom of people so he would, I don't know, stop trying to tamper with everyone else's DNA or something like that?
see, with that, I think it's like, because even in scripture, you know, it says that Jacob I loved, but Esau I hated. You know, God is a God of love, and he loves all of his children, all his creation. So it's like, when I read that, especially with all the stuff that I researched and learned, I was like, that probably answers why God hated Esau, because he wasn't, uh, as they said of Noah, you know, when Noah was preserved through the flood, it says that he was the only, him and his family were the only righteous ones left. When you go to the Hebrew, it says Tamim. Him and his family were the only ones that were Tamim. And that word in Hebrew always refers to the purity of the blood
Yeah.
of the sacrificial animals. So it's saying that he had pure blood. And so it was kind of like, you know, and it says that Satan is the ruler of this world. Even when Satan appears to Jesus in his wilderness wanderings and tempts him, you know, he tells him, bow the knee. All you got to do is bow and serve me and worship me, and I'll give you all the nations of the world because they are mine to give to whom I please. And that's what Paul was talking about when he said, we traded the truth for a lie. We worshiped the created things instead of the creator. We traded our dominion away to Satan.
With
And
no with Noah too, it also says he was pure in his genealogy. I think that's the word it uses. And to me, that always makes me think that that's a reference to him being pure genetically, possibly. So
yeah,
that's
that's
kind of
why he was
why,
saved.
yeah, that's kind of why I was like throwing DNA into this, because I wonder if there's like with Cain, with Esau, and with the Nephilim, if there's a very clear difference of DNA with those three. I
I
do,
do. I think so.
yeah.
But here's where I differ with people, and this is something I've not really explained well in some of these interviews, because I've had people hit me up on social media or email, because they're like, well, if what you're saying is right, then the racist view, you're confirming it. Because if someone, you know, you can't control who your parents are, what if you have Nephilim DNA or serpent seed DNA in your blood, you're automatically doomed to hell. And I was like, no, that's where I differ, because I think that's where the perversion happened. God gives free will to all. And even Cain, if Cain is not a serpent seed, then this entire theory is dead on arrival. That's where it all starts. And if you notice in that story, when Cain starts getting bitter and looking at his brother's favor with hatred and envy, what happens? God comes down and reasons with Cain. He says, you know, Cain, why are you upset? If you do not do well, will you not succeed? And then he even says, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he basically says, these emotions that you're going through, you must grab hold of them and rule over them. So he sees this conflict, and God's trying to reason with him and talk some sense into him. But the choice is ultimately Cain's. If he was a damned seed or person right from the creation, there would have been no point in God coming and talking to him and reasoning with him and offering him an alternative choice or life path. So to me, that shows plainly that you're not doomed because of the your parents. You have a choice. But granted, I mean, if you believe in this theory and you look back far enough, I mean, we all probably have at least a speck of this gene type, or a large percentage of us do. But I think it's all on intent and the heart, because it even says that nothing that you put in your body can defile it. It's what comes out that defiles the man. And your DNA and your genealogies, that's in you. So that can't corrupt you. It's your intentions and your choices.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I'm starting to put all this together slowly. I before I thought that the DNA corruption was just an Nephilim thing. Now I'm thinking, there's these three mystery bloodlines, if you could call it that. You've got Cain, Esau, and then the Nephilim. And I'm wondering if the serpent seed goes beyond Nephilim to like include these other people like Esau and Cain. I don't know if I'm reaching
Yeah.
too far with that or what, but
I mean, it's a possibility, and you have to keep that door open. And with me, like I said, I've just recently kind of come to this serpent seed stuff. But Dr. Joy Pugh, are you familiar with her?
nope.
She's and I don't know what she's got her degrees in, but she's got a lot of degrees. She's an educated woman. She's from South Georgia. She's a good old country girl like me. So I think, well, I'm a country boy, but you know what I mean.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
she
yeah.
talks about things and explains things that I can understand them. She puts them
Okay.
in good old boy language. And she was talking to me on a show about this whole idea, and how she explained it. It made perfect good old boy logic. Even if I didn't have never read the scripture in my entire life, never even heard of the serpent seed doctrine, the way she told this, it was like all signs point to yes. All my reasoning points to yes. All my logic points to yes. And she was talking about this event. She said, I was raised and taught that there was this apple. They bit into this apple, and and they become consciously aware, and they rebelled and they fell. She said, then I got older and got to read, and she said, there is no apple in the story. She said, I was like, where's the apple?
Yeah.
And she said, but it does say that Adam and Eve partook of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And she named all these different verses where heavenly beings are compared to trees, the cedars of Lebanon, and all this other stuff. And she said, um, the Hebrew word for eats, and she said the word, uh, when you go into like Logos Bible software or one of these interlinears and highlight that word and search, it gives you all the different times that was in the scripture and what it was translated to in English. And one of those translations that's quite often is enjoys. So it says, if you look at it in that context and put that in there, Eve partook of the tree of good knowledge and she enjoyed.
Ah,
Then she went to her husband and he too enjoyed. And she said this was Old Testament. It was eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. She said the cursing always correlated, mirrored image of the crime. And she said, and a good example is, she said, my mother was very strict and said that we couldn't have any sweets before supper. She said, me and my sister knew that. She said, but she kept a cookie jar above the refrigerator, and said one day she was preparing supper and she went into the living room for something. And me and my sister thought we could jump up there and grab a cookie and eat it really fast without her knowing. And said that sure enough, she walked in and caught us in the middle of eating them. She said, do you know what we did, Justin? She said, the first thing we did, we covered our mouth.
cover their mouth. Yeah.
She said, because that's where the sin was. That's where we transgressed. And she said, and Adam and Eve, as soon as they enjoy this tree, they covered their private parts. And then she says, then look at the cursing. She said, if the sin was eating, he could have cursed them with rotten teeth, a toothache, stomach cramps, vomiting, diarrhea, something that correlated with eating. She said, but not one, not two. She said, every part of the curse had to do with the result of a sexual action. She said, cursed with labor and childbirth, cursed with painful periods and menstrual cramps. And then you get a cursing of not just her seed, a cursing of the serpent's seed also. And then the Hebrew word used that Eve was beguiled. Once again, if you look through Logos Bible software or one of these interlinears, that word is used often with a sexual connotation to it. And Cain's name even means in Hebrew, it means acquired. And there's only one verse that the people that laugh at this doctrine and put it away, they only have one verse. And it's the one where it says, and Adam knew his wife, and she bore Cain. And then it says, and then again, she bore Abel. It doesn't say conceived. Bore means deliver.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like if she partook of the tree of the Nakash and got pregnant, it makes perfect sense why God said, I'm going to put enmity between your seed and your seed because Adam's going to impregnate you and you're going to have two different seeds here. And then you have that whole mirrored image of Genesis 3:15 at the birth of Esau again. It makes, I mean, to me, it makes total sense and it answers so many questions because a lot of people want to point to the Nephilim and say, oh, that's the serpent seed.
Yeah. So
That's not the devil's seed.
it wasn't an apple. That makes sense to me. Also, Nakash not being a serpent to begin with makes sense to me. I don't think that this was a snake that talked to her. I I think I think we're on the same page with this. Nakash has that meaning that some if maybe it's Hebrew, it says the shining one.
Yeah, the shining one or the one who practices divination.
Yeah, so but it kind of this may have been a humanoid that was talking to her, something with the form of a man, right? Or
Well, a
an
lot of
angel.
angels were depicted as humans. They eat,
Yes.
they drink, they sleep. And, the New Testament says, don't turn away strangers and be nice to everyone because you may be entertaining angels unaware.
Yes.
And even when you get to Ezekiel 28, and that's another thing I touch on in the book is the garments from the Garden of Eden, because this is a very key piece to this story and this puzzle. The consensus majority is that this was Satan. It starts off as a condemnation to the king of Tyre, but then the wording changes. He's no longer talking to a human because he says, you were perfect in all your ways. You were an anointed guardian cherub. You were in the garden of God. And it said every precious stone was your covering. And it names, beryl, onyx, diamond, sapphire, jasper, uh, set in gold was the inlays, and they were perfect, made for you on the day you were created. And then so it's describing this priestly ephod. And then it goes on, it says, and you profaned your sanctuaries. So not only does he have a priestly ephod on, he has a sanctuary because it says he profaned it. The description of this entity fits his name. If he had on this multicolored stone and bright color fabric ephod with gold inlays and diamonds and rubies and all this stuff, it fits his name. He would definitely be shining.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and wouldn't there be maybe a supernatural technology associated with that ephod if it's anything like the Urim and Thummim that the priest used to go into the presence of God? There seemed to be some sort of a reason that they had 12 different types of stones, and I, there seemed to be like something magical about it, or
Mhm.
or maybe not magical, but some sort of a technology there.
Yeah, definitely. Because the consensus is, nobody really knows what the Umim and Thummim exactly were. Some people believe that it was because it talks about it was under the ephod. So
Wow.
was this, stones that were connected to the ephod breastplate, but just on the inside? Some people think that these were, divining stones, divination stones, like runes, and they were in a bag or on a cord underneath the ephod. Because then when you get to King Saul and David and all these kings, many times before they go make a decision to go to war or some kind of major decision, they all say they want to uh, consult the Umim and Thummim. And it's pretty cool when you dive into that. I did an episode with Ryan Peterson called "Powerful Stones," and we talked about that and broke that down. And he was saying that some people believe that it was these divination stones that you pulled out and you asked a question, and uh, like they were like one was colored black, one was colored white. These two stones, he said, so if the black one rolled out, it could have been a no, like the magic 8 ball. And he
Yeah.
threw out all these different theories. He said, but one I think is really cool. He said, some people believe that these stones lit up on the chest, kind of like Simon says,
Oh,
and there
wow.
was initials and Hebrew letters on these tablets, and that when they would, ask the questions and do all the rituals and stuff, that these stones on this breastplate would actually light up.
Wow. That's a new one for me. It's like crystals in the Bible.
Yeah.
That's
And once
crazy.
again, a lot of people get hung up and be like, that's new age, that's
Yeah,
the
yeah.
devil. Same thing with astrology and astronomy. Once again, it goes back to Paul. We traded the truth for a lie and worshiped the created things instead of the creator. God, gives permission and instructions on how to use these breastplates and these stones to communicate with him. He gives you all these plants for medicinal purposes
Yeah.
for your benefit. Your brain has receptors to receive a lot of these chemicals and all these different things. And it says, I, put the moon and the stars in the firmament for signs and for seasons. You're supposed to look up there. He put them up there for a reason, for
Yeah,
signs and seasons, but
yes.
it's mankind, once again, of the heart, the intentions. We perverted it and we worshiped these stars and heavenly bodies like they were gods. We worshiped these crystals and stones like they were God. We got so infused with pharmakia that we worshiped the plants and the minerals. We traded the truth for a lie.
Yeah, yeah, it all gets kind of twisted and perverted once it gets into human hands. But even back to astronomy and astrology, that's a part of the story of the birth of Jesus. The three wise men were using the heavens to map out their journey. And even in that story too, you've got King Herod, who I was looking at something recently, and I found out that King Herod was actually an Edomite, and we see how he wanted to kill baby Jesus. He wanted to find the child and kill it. And I see that too, maybe as being a continuation of this seed war.
Yeah, 100%. Because, like I said, you had these garments, and this was the birthright. You keep hearing about, the birthright, the birthright. That's what this was. And when you go to the book of Jasher, you follow that, and it gets passed to the eldest son. Enoch had it. It went to Methuselah. From Methuselah, it went to Noah. From Noah, it went over the great flood. And it says that in Ham's going out, Ham stole the garments. And they wind up with Nimrod. And then it says that Esau, who also was a mighty hunter of the field, that was the same title that Nimrod had. So this was a battle of the ego here. You had two men that were both claimed to be the mighty hunter of the field. And I've told people on shows before, it's like the Highlander. There can only be one baby. And it said in the book of Jasher that Nimrod looked upon Esau with envy and hatred all of his days, and that he went out into the field to hunt this Sasquatch guy. And I tell him it's kind of like Gaston in Beauty and the Beast. He was the mighty hunter, and he went after this beast of a man and wanted his head on his wall and for the bragging rights. But Esau kills him and two of his Gibborim men, same word used to describe the Nephilim giants. And Nimrod himself was described as a giant. And according to the book of Jasher, that's how he became a Gibborim, because in Genesis it says that Nimrod became a Gibborim. The book of Jasher equates that to him getting these garments and putting them on.
Might that be a fourth, I don't know, a fourth iteration of this serpent seed where you've got Cain, Esau, Nephilim, and then you've got this guy Nimrod who becomes serpent seed. Does that track with you?
Oh yeah, and that's the thing too, is it's the battle of the seeds and the battle of the birthright. Because think about it, and I kind of jumped around. I'll backtrack just a little bit for those that's not listened to me on another show. It's my theory that at the fall in the garden, it says that God covers their nakedness, with according to what translation you read or how you was, what denomination you was raised in, but made garments of skins. Well, when you go to the Hebrew, it says that God hilbished their nakedness with a kanonet. And hilbish is, covering of the nakedness. And then when you get to kanonet, most often that word is translated as tunic. But some English translations just changed it to skins. And so, but when you go through God's instructions to the priests and to Moses on how to create these priestly garments, it uses that exact same verbiage. It says that the ephod that they made in their wilderness wanderings was a kanonet, and it was used to hilbish their nakedness. So it's drawing and pointing back with what scholars like to call the law of first mention. When a word is used or a phrase is used first, it sets the standard, and when they use it again, they're pointing back to that first time that it was used. And all rabbis point their beginnings to Adam. The rabbinic tradition is that Adam was the first king and priest of all creation. And remember, Ezekiel 28 said that Satan was perfect in all his ways in the garden. Every precious stone was his covering. He defiled his sanctuary. So in the book, I lay out the theory that when Satan was cast out, his priestly position was taken from him, and his garments, something he wore with pride, was ripped away from him and given to humanity, given to Adam. And that's how Adam became the first priest and king of all creation. And that was the birthright, the priesthood, the authority symbol of kingship. So of course Satan wants these back. And if he's got a seed, he's going to do everything he can to try to get his sons to get this birthright and those garments back into the family. And that's why I say that give him a lot of good motivation to flip the two seeds in the womb to make Esau come out first, because he was the eldest. He'd be first in line to get the garments. And then when he kills Nimrod, it says that he steals the garments back and then runs back home. And here's where it ties into the book of Genesis, the trading of the birthright that never made sense, because it says he just fought 3 giants, killed them all, and killed King Nimrod, probably sustained some life-threatening injuries. And he just killed the king. He's on the run, man. So he runs in home, probably bleeding out, got some life-threatening injuries, and he's asking his brother, sew me up, bandage my wounds, give me something to eat, hide me. I'm desperate. I'm in trouble. And he just stole the birthright, the garments. And Jacob seizes the opportunity. He's like, yeah, sure. Trade me your birthright. And that's why he said, fine, take it. What use is a birthright to me when I'm dead? Now that makes a lot more sense than just he come in from the field exhausted and traded his birthright.
Yeah. Yeah. And he was, I should note too, I've always read it like this. I got the sense that he was extremely famished. He was very hungry because he had been in a battle, essentially. He was fighting these giants. And that took it out of him. And he probably sustained injuries too, as well. And I've always had this thought, and this might just be my imagination, but I always had this thought that back then the Earth's atmosphere was different, and plants were maybe bigger, things were possibly just different. And I always thought that maybe ancient man healed differently than we do. Maybe they needed to eat, and then they could heal from their wounds on a level that we can't today. Maybe it took them 2 hours to heal something that might take us a couple days. And he had to get that food in him, though, to jumpstart that process. Now, that's just conjecture, but regardless of the healing part and the wounds part, he was battling these guys, and that did take it out of him. He needed to eat. So that bowl of stew uh probably looked like his lifeline in that
Yeah.
moment.
And you could very well be right. And how I looked at it was just kind of like an allegory, like it was the soup. Yeah, it might have been a literal soup, but it was like, no, hide me, protect me, give me nourishment, you know. Uh, but there is one cool thing I read in a book. I can't remember the name of it now, but I think it was Dr. Laura Sanger's book on the Federal Reserve.
Ah,
But she was talking about Esau. She had a chapter or two in there, and she said that this red lentil stew was a cool part in the Jewish heritage because at the beginning of that story in Genesis, it says that at this time, Abraham had died, but Esau went out into the field to hunt. And then Jacob was preparing this red stew and then came home and traded the birthright. But there was all kinds of Jewish tradition of making this red lentil stew as like a death ritual for the mourning of a lost relative or an elder.
yeah.
So it was like the way she painted it was that where Jacob was a man of the house, he stayed indoors and was more about reading the text and learning and being around his mother, learning how to cook and the traditions and all this kind of stuff, where Esau was just a wild carnal man, a manly man that when Abraham had passed away, the family was in mourning. But Esau was like, I'm going to go hunt. So it painted Jacob in this light even more favorably, that he was mourning the death of his grandfather and doing these ritualistic rites and preparing this red stew because that was what was expected of him. It was a respectful and thing that he was supposed to do culturally. And then when Esau come back home, probably beat the crap and cut all the pieces and starved him to death, seen this stew, and Jacob was saving it for his mourning father because that was part of the tradition. And Esau's like, no, the hell with that. Give it to me. I need it. So
Yeah.
once again, it was painting Esau in a non-favorable light.
I wonder too if it's another example of real life stuff kind of lining up with the Bible. I see it happen a lot with archaeological sites, but also with, if these were red lentils, that is a food type that's been used in that region for thousands of years. And they specifically red lentils because they keep longer than rice. It's just it would have
Hmm.
been a perfect food for the ancients to have around and use because it will fill up a stew. It'll give if you have a soup, it'll give your soup more texture, and it goes well with everything. You could eat it with eggs, you can eat it with meat, and it stores for long periods of time,
Mm,
specifically
yeah.
red lentils. So I always wondered if that was what they're talking about in that story, like specifically red lentils, just because it's been
Mm.
used for so long. Um, there's all kinds of cool little
Yeah.
fun
Cultural
tie-ins in the
context.
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
And
I mean,
and what I was getting to, I backed up and went down a bunny trail and got lost there. But you mentioned, the Edomites and the different, seed lines and stuff. I was getting to that, and then I remembered that I didn't give the backstory of the garment, so I had to give that context. But once this happens, it's kind of like he verbally agrees with his brother, but it's kind of like in the back of his mind, he was desperate. He was like, there is no witnesses. If I make it through this, I'm not giving you the birthright. Huh. But then at the death of Isaac, when Isaac was getting close to his last few days, he thought his life was slipping away, that he went blind. Once again, we see that this is not hyperbole like you had mentioned. Oh, maybe his arms were hairy, or maybe this was just poetic language. They have to kill a goat, which is, hairy, greasy, and coarse, and wrap up Jacob in this fur to fool his blind father. He was literally that hairy, and then steals the blessing. So this was kind of like the lawyer's office signing the paperwork. The deal is done. So when Esau comes in and realizes he's been basically screwed out of his birthright and his blessing both, he becomes angry and says he's going to kill his brother. So his mother sends him away. But here's where he goes into like full rebellion, and he takes two wives from the Canaanites, and they are Horite and Hivites. And if you listen to Gary Wayne or take a deep dive into the genealogies there, those were known Nephilim giant tribes. So here you have this hairy quote unquote man marrying and interbreeding with Nephilim giant clans. You have a really high probability of throwing some strange looking pups. And Esau's nephew, his son was Eliphaz. Eliphaz also took a Horite giant Tess and produced this guy named Amalek, who an entire tribe of Nephilim giants was named after, called the Amalekites. And that name in Hebrew means blood lickers. And this is the first tribe that God's people have encounters with in their wilderness wanderings. And they're described like ghosts, or in the very least, like in modern terms, like militia type warfare. They hid in the woods, like in the shadows. And the old men and women that were stragglers in the back of the pack, they just run in, take them out, and get out of there before they even knew what happened, just
wow.
picking them off. And they finally come to a head and have a battle, but it takes the supernatural will of God and the Moses' staff. Moses has to go up on a hill, and it says that the Amalekites were winning the war. But when Moses went up there and held up his staff, then Israel could overcome them. So it was like some sorcery was going on behind the scenes between their magicians and Moses. And there's where you get all your rules. And you don't get rules and regulations unless those rules or regulations are already being broken. And it says, no longer will you sacrifice to hairy goat demons. No longer will you pass your children through the fire. No longer will you seek necromancers and sorcerers. And the book of Isaiah talks about the hairy wildlings or something like that. But when you go into the Septuagint and the original languages, they're talking about satyrs, fawns, half goat, half men. So
Chimera.
yeah, so here I think this is telling. God's people were seeing these people, and these people were practicing those acts. They were practicing passing children through the fire. They were practicing necromancy and sorcery. They were drinking the blood
Yeah.
and doing all these things, and they were imitating them and copying them. And that's why God come and said, "Don't do this, don't do that." And Rashi was a medieval rabbi that done a lot of work on the midrash and the targums, wrote his own commentaries and stuff. He said that when God said, go into the land and go devout to destruction these Nephilim giant clans, it says, kill every man, woman, and child, and even animal, was because these people were known sorcerers and they were shapeshifters,
Oh,
that
wow.
they would shapeshift into animals to avoid capture and death.
Wow. You know, that the goat demon thing, that really stood out to me. I've got this version
Mm-hmm.
that I read from earlier is a New Revised Standard version. And in this version, it says multiple times it talks about the goat demons in the Old Testament. And there's that one I'm blanking on. I don't know if it was Deuteronomy. Uh, I'm not going to remember what book it was,
The
but there,
Azazel scapegoat.
yeah, yeah. When they talk about sacrifice, they say in this version it says something along the lines of send a goat out into the wilderness for Azazel, but they capitalize it, capital A, Azazel, as if it's being sent out there to an entity.
Yeah.
But and it seems like Azazel is kind of maybe connected to the goat demons in some sort of way. I'm not really sure about that, but I want to say that there was a passage in there where it seemed like the two were mentioned very closely to each other.
Mm-hmm.
Azazel, I think, is just probably a fallen angel who was trapped in that region potentially.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Azazel. But yeah, and I think too was you have Esau, this hairy man, created an entire tribe and nation of people by breeding with these giants. So they had these, some of them might have been giants, some of them been average height, but all of them were covered in hair,
yeah,
and they probably wore, helmets or hats with horns just to try maybe make themselves even look even more intimidating. And they were sacrificing children, drinking the blood of their enemies, and doing necromancy and sorcery. And people had legends that they were shapeshifters, hiding out in the woods and picking them off, and all this stuff. So it was like, I believe that's who they were talking about.
yeah, yeah. You're getting a dose of folklore and cryptids in that story. It's fascinating. And I think too, I mean, Esau and maybe his descendants, I do think that he would have looked like something, if we follow the text, he would have looked like Chewbacca, maybe with like a
Mm,
human face, but he would have been that hairy, it seems like. And
yeah.
there seems to be something connecting, there seems to be some sort of a marker here. Because I think too, with isn't the mark of Cain, isn't part of that where he becomes hairy as well?
Yeah. When you go through the, the oral traditions of the Jewish people, and then you get into the midrash. That's what they say. And that guy I mentioned earlier, that medieval rabbi, Rashi, talks about that too. And he was saying that Cain's cursing was that he was covered in hair and he was given a horn. And that's why he was so freaked out about being killed, because number one, he looked like this hairy beast, and the people, the day six people that were already out there, was going to hunt him down and kill him. Or the beasts of the field would see him as a predator and probably get tore apart by wild animals. So he was, in his mind, he was screwed on both ends. He was just terrified. But what's really cool is when you go through the Midrash and that guy Rashi, is that in Genesis you have this story of Lamech, And it says that one day he just comes in and he says, if Cain was cursed times seven, I'll be cursed 70 times seven. I just killed a man and in my anger struck down a youth. Well, according to the Midrash, was that Lamech was going blind in his older age and that his youngest son would go hunting with him and aid him, help him track the animal, point his bow for him. And they see this big hairy beast out in the woods, and his son squares up his bow for his dad and tells him to shoot. And they drop the beast, and when they walk up, they realize that it's Cain. And in his anger, Lamech kills his son for the mistake. And Rashi says that it's his belief that people misunderstood the cursing, that it wasn't saying that whoever kills Cain will be cursed times seven, that God was saying that Abel's blood would be revenged in the seventh generation. It was a prophecy. And when you count down, Lamech was the seventh.
Ah, yeah, you don't hear that that take on that curse very much. That makes sense. Makes all the
Yeah. And
sense.
my thing is too, is I mean, like any good investigator, you go to the source.
Yeah.
If you have a police officer and you're the police officer and show up to a call and there's two guys standing in front of a store that just got robbed, and one of the other cops tell you, hey, you know, do your interview. The one on the left was here and seen it all happen, and the one on the right was uh 4 blocks down, but he heard from his sister's brother the story. Who do you want to talk to? You want to talk to the guy that was there. And so that's how I look at these ancient legends and these other non-biblical writings, because they were from that time. It was their culture. It was their stories. I'm going to take their word over a 21st century uh, scholar or preacher that's, you know, reading it with their contextual eyes. I want to get to the source if I can.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, you see too in the ancient world, you see serpent iconography throughout the ancient world. It's all throughout just about everywhere, especially South America. You see it a lot. And I was wondering, of course, we have Serpent Mound here in Ohio as well, and there are other serpent mounds here in the U.S. that people don't know about. Like there's a guy I follow that goes through and digs up old accounts of giants and he posts them. And he found an old article that referenced 7 or 8 serpent mounds in addition to the one in Ohio. And I know I've seen one in Indiana as well. There's one in Indiana that people don't know about. I've seen the pictures of it. And I'm just wondering, do you think that that somehow fits into this?
Oh yeah. Uh, and I think it kind of revolves around into even the DMT, the ayahuasca, the mushrooms, because you know in the book of Enoch it says that one of the things that they taught humanity was the cutting of roots. And I tell people it's kind of like at the fall, it's kind of like we had our, if you look at your brain is like a radio, like an old school radio with a dial. It's a receiver, and your eyes are uh the thing you used to see, but it's tuned to this certain channel in your brain that transcribes it and tells you what you're seeing. It's like in the garden, we walked amongst the sons of God and God himself. It's like, you know, if you want to relate that to dimensions, it's like we were like in a fifth, sixth, eighth dimension. And at the fall, it's like that wire was cut and our radio channel was turned. And these fallen angels, to communicate with these people, was through these plants and the cutting of these roots, this pharmakia, and they taught it to us. That way we could take these things and go up an extra dimension or two and tune that receptor so we could see and communicate with them. And that's what they wanted. And without fail, when you go through uh, Rick Strassman's studies where he was uh, hooking up IVs and dripping pure DMT to people and doing all those studies, uh, Darby in his book, The Cosmic Serpent, without fail, all these people that take these mind altering drugs and go into this other realm, they mess with that frequency. Without fail, every single one sees what they describe as a cosmic serpent, this huge serpent with glowing scales and sparkled, and it's a shining one. And like
Yeah.
you said, you have this serpentine iconography everywhere. And scripture describes him as that ancient twisting serpent.
Yeah.
So it's like, could he shapeshift? Was this just an allegory, an epithet? I mean, we don't know, but we do know that there was an obvious correlation to the serpent and him. Some people even talk about, like serpentine looking humanoids. It's just, it's one of those things we'll speculate forever
Sure.
and probably never figure out till the end, but it's definitely interesting to look into it and postulate.
The DMT aspect that you brought up, that's an interesting point there. There's a guy who I'm thinking about bringing on to the show. I talked to him for about an hour and a half on the phone a couple weeks ago, and he was telling me about his experiences with DMT, which were extensive. It wasn't just a couple times. Like he's done it a lot. And he was telling me about it. And what was happening to him was he's told me flat out, he's like, when you take this, you go into another dimension. And I was like, yeah, that's what I thought. I was like, that's been my suspicion. I'm like, yeah, it seems that way. And I asked him, I'm like, what makes you say that? And he's like, well, it got to a point there where every time I took it, I was talking to the same entity. And I was picking up where the conversation left off from the previous trip. And he's like, the entity told me her name and everything. And I'm probably just not going to go too far into this because I'll just let him tell it because it's his story. But that was enough for me right there. And then he went on to further describe this situation. But they were carrying on a conversation, almost like if your phone call got interrupted and you'd call the person back. And
Yeah, pick up right where you left off.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I think that was an ancient form, not even ancient. I guess it's just been around now for all of time. It's a form of making contact with these entities in this other realm. And it's crazy because a week after I had that conversation with him, he told me the name of this entity that he was talking to. And a week after that, I was going through and I was looking into some old the origins of the Nazis and all that. There's a book that the Nazis were very heavily into called the Ora Linda, and it deals with a group of people in the islands of northern Germany who have their still to this day they have their own language and their own culture there. And in this book, they are the people of this entity, right? So I don't know if I'm doing a good job of explaining it. I'm trying not to say the name of this entity, but if that makes sense. But they're called Frisians. These people
Okay,
are,
I've heard that.
yeah. And the Nazis kind of found attribute their descendants to another one of these Atlantean Aryan type of bloodlines, but they answer to one specific entity, and that entity's name is the name of the entity that this guy was talking to in this DMT trip. And I just thought that was crazy. I was
Hmm.
just like, maybe this is just one of those beings that people throughout time have contacted. And by the way, I am not recommending people do this. I'm just
Yeah.
I don't promote it, but I don't deny it either. That's where I'm
Like
at with
that
that.
song you referenced at the beginning of the show. Pleased to meet you. Hope you can
Yeah,
guess my name.
exactly. That's it. I mean, that's what we're dealing with here. And I've got I got really into the UFO thing for a while. I went down that rabbit hole, which I'm not dogmatic on that, by the way. It was just something I was interested in. But what I've found is that that entity Ishtar, also known as
And I
Aphrodite
know.
and Inanna, she's been around meddling in human affairs for a very long time. And she's showing up in this modern day UFO movement as well in my research. She kept coming up
Mm,
again and again and again for me. So I do think that it's like sympathy for the devil, where throughout the ages, you have a group of these entities that are meddling in human affairs.
yeah.
And it probably ties
They're either
in.
the fallen angels from Genesis 6 or the rebellious sons of God from Deuteronomy 32. And there's nothing been
That's the best part is
written or
that
added to the book. Is we have no reason to believe that their free will had ended, and we don't still continually have angels falling and rebelling.
hmm. Well, that's the best part about getting into this stuff more heavily for me and looking for answers. It's like I'm finding answers for this stuff. Like everything I just said about this guy's DMT trip and these people, this civilization that answered to this one entity and Ishtar, that sounds like crazy talk, but there's answers for that here if you want them.
Yeah, and all these ancient cultures too. They had skull cults, and they had ancestor worship and veneration of their ancestors. And it was even something that God's people done. If you look into Abraham when he hadn't had a child yet, he was talking to Eleazar, his cupbearer, and he said, who will bear my cup? Eleazar, my servant? I am without an heir." He was talking about the ancient rituals of veneration and ancestor worship. They believed that the eldest son was known as the cupbearer, and they had a kishbim, and they would put these teraphim or little model uh entity or people, little like model people, like action figures, basically in our modern vernacular, and bury them under the house at the table, and they would have a tube running up to the table. And like there was a certain time of the year where they would say the name of their ancestors and pour wine down this tube and offer food to it, because they believed that, kind of like the Hispanic people with the Day of the Dead. They put up pictures, they light candles, they present. If I was dead and loved Jack Daniels and ramen noodle soups, somebody would hold my picture out, light candles, and put Jack Daniels and ramen noodle and leave it out for me, because I needed that to sustain myself in the afterlife. And if nobody done that, your soul just got obliterated and went into the abyss, the ultimate second death. And that's what they believed back then. And that's what Abraham was alluding to. He was like, who's going to be my cupbearer? Who's going to be the one to say my name and to offer these drink offerings and stuff? I have no eldest son. And the berserkers, up there, they would do these necromantic rituals and call on their dead ancestors, warrior spirits, to inhabit them. That's what the berserkers were. And it said they were possessed. They were wild men, that they would get stabbed and gutted and keep fighting. And because they were ultimately possessed by demons, by these Nephilim giant tribes,
Yeah.
the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim. And I think that's just something we see throughout culture. They think they're doing dead ancestor worship, and they're really venerating and worshiping these disembodied spirits of the Nephilim. And a lot of people now are talking about seeing ghosts and seeing grandma at the edge of the bed. That ain't grandma.
Yeah. I don't think so either. I don't think so either. I think there's a lot more to apparitions that people see, and even some of these aliens, that might not actually be an alien. It could be something taking on the form of what we perceive to be an alien. There's, I think that this intelligence takes on the form of like a trickster sometimes, like a
Yeah.
astrotheological trickster. It's been around a
Yeah.
long
Whatever we
time.
want to see,
Yeah, right, right.
whatever we're going to better accept them as.
Yeah.
Hang on a second. I need to use the bathroom just really quick.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We'll pause it.
Oh. Well, that 16 ounce.
Yeah, I know it'll do it to you. I always bring a cup of tea in with me and like a Gatorade, and sometimes I drink too much of it, and I'm sitting here doing the dance in my chair.
The
I
tea
wanted
will
to,
run right through you.
yes, yes, it does. I wanted to show you something real quick. This is something that L.A. Marzulli posted recently. It's just a wild picture because he said this post was things that he's seen in his travels. So I'm going to try to figure out where this was. Um, I'd say it
Like
belongs to,
Peru.
yeah, yeah, it definitely South America. I'd say it belongs to the ancient world, but it's also got these little faces in here that look like emojis. That's what stuck out to me the most about this. And
Oh, yeah.
it's got this serpent iconography.
Yeah, all over it.
Yep.
You got the double-headed eagle. You got like the staff of Asclepius, that staff with the serpents twisting up it like a DNA strand almost.
Yeah, yeah.
The long forked tongue.
So just yeah, it's got these on the left side there on this. Well, there's two staffs. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
On the left side, it's got something that looks like a spirit. Like maybe it's a cat, but it's a very strange.
If it's South America, it's probably a jaguar.
Yeah, that's a good. So what did you say just a second ago? Did you say double-headed eagle? Did that mean something to you?
Yeah, that's a lot of uh symbolic stuff that you see like in the mystery schools and the Freemasons. Uh, which I don't have in front of me, but I have a copy of Morals and Dogma, Albert Pike.
Mm-hmm.
And on the front of it, that's what it is. It's a double-headed eagle looking east and west.
Wow.
And it's basically uh, the Nordus Ovus Seclorum, New World Order that expands as far as east to the west, and the head looks both directions and spreads its wings. So it's basically saying that it's all knowing, all seeing, and very vast.
This kind of reminds me of it has DMT trip vibes as well.
Oh yeah.
This looks like maybe a shaman, or maybe how a shaman would be perceived after you take something psychedelic.
Hmm. And it's
And
the marrying of opposites too, because one thing with the shamanism and stuff down there in South America, the uh the what's the word I'm looking for? Jaguar is basically symbolistic for earth, the ground,
mhm.
because he's like the top predator and top thing that they seen that was on the ground. And then that thing up there I called an eagle. If that's South America, it's probably a condor. That was their big religious symbol, and venerated bird. So like a double-headed condor. So that's like the top predator of the sky. So in
Wow.
each hand, in one hand, he's holding the the symbol for earth and the ground, and then the other hand is the sky. So it's the marrying of opposites of the yin and yang, basically the combining of heaven and earth.
Wow. Incredible. I'm glad I showed this.
Yeah.
I certainly would
Which
have
I,
picked up on all that.
yeah, and the only thing I have is because I've done a lot of like reading on it. Brian Forrester, He's written a lot of good books, and he's lived there for the past, like, 20, 30 years. He's really submerged in the culture and stuff. He talks about a lot of this stuff in his books.
Yeah, he's on my list of he's somebody I want to have on. A previous guest was talking about him as well, and that's funny because my previous guest was on here talking about the trip to his expeditions in Peru, and there's just all sorts of civilizations down there that we don't know anything about. There's sites down there that haven't even been touched. This guy is
Hmm.
finding unknown ancient cities and temples all throughout northern Peru, on the coastline. Actually, not most of this is not too far inland, and there was one that he looked at, and I went and checked out some of the local legends there, and they have their legends trace back to a guy who came on a boat who started the civilization from the
Oh
Pacific
yeah,
somewhere.
Veracocha.
Well, in addition to Veracocha, yeah. Yeah. So
Yeah,
it's not that's my thing. It's like there's a many Veracocha like uh
and Quetzalcoatl. Both of
yeah,
them guys were said to have come out of the water, riding, coming from the east and riding. How do they word it? Uh, a boat without paddles, and that it was
yes.
a bed of serpents.
Yeah. Oh, I wanted to ask you one other thing today as we're kind of winding down here. Did you I heard you mention on a podcast, I think something about having a Nephilim lance,
Hmm.
or you knew
Yeah,
somebody who has one, I think.
yeah. Chief Joseph Riverwind. Uh,
Okay.
I loved him, and
Was he a
I
guest of
discovered.
yours?
Yeah,
Oh, I'll check
yeah. I
that
had
out.
him on the show, and I first discovered him through L.A. Marzulli, and he's been featured in a lot of LA's films. And he is a Native American chief, and has lots of history and stories about the giants and his people battling these giants and stuff, and the stone skin giants. And he's really up to date with all the legends and the history of his people and stuff, and also other nations. uh, and he's really active. He's like an emissary for his tribe, and goes to represent them in Washington, and goes to Israel, and he's just really, like, politically and socially active. But on one of LA's documentaries, he went to a conference, and I think it might have been in Ohio, or something, but it was a Mounds conference, and it was like him and Fritz Zimmerman and Dizdar and all these different people, and Chief Joseph went. But there was some guy that was just in the seating there. It was just, he wasn't a speaker or nothing like that. He was just a normal guy coming to watch. And while on one of the breaks, went to the vendors tables where everybody sits and stuff, and talks and sells their merch and stuff, and brings this big long thing, look like a pool stick, wrapped up in this cloth, and tells LA uh, he found this in Michigan next to those copper mines, those ancient copper mines.
Mhm.
And he wanted to show it to him, that he thought it was like an ancient bronze sword. And he rolls it out, man, and it's just like 24 or 25 pound uh, bronze sword looking thing. And they're like, oh my God, this thing's so big and huge, and this is crazy. And Joseph seen it and said that he knew right away. He said it wasn't a sword. He said this was a spearhead. He said because it had the long shaft, and it tapered down and then come back out again to where you could lash the rope around it. And
Mhm.
and this thing was, I'm just guessing off the top of my head. I held it in my hands. It was probably about 4.5 foot long, and weighed like 22 to 26 pounds. I mean, this thing was huge and it's heavy. And so it was lashed onto like an 8 foot long or more pole.
Wow.
And so he was like, yeah, this is a spear. And he says, and it's huge. This would have to be wielded by like a 14, 15 foot man. And he said, and it uh, matches the description of the ones that the stone skinned giants used. He said, because in our native traditions, that these spears were so big and so long that they could impale like three braves on this lance. Like they would stab one and skewer them and then keep running and keep stabbing. They could get like three people on one of these things. And it also matched the description of the guy that come to L.A. Marzulli and another one that went to Steve Quayle, that this Afghani giant that they found in Kandahar. It said that he had this huge, long spear, and that he was impaling the soldiers with it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I found out that he lives like 15 minutes down the road from me, and he agreed to meet me in person. So we sat down in person, and I brought my cameras and did an interview, and he brought that spear.
Okay.
So I got to hold this thing and get pictures with it and stuff. It was awesome.
And how big was it again?
The the spear, it was probably like 4.5 foot long and weighed like, 22 to 26 pounds.
Man, that's wild.
And
And that
then,
was
it was attached to like an 8 foot long pole,
yeah.
when it was used.
So okay, so the spear itself, the spearhead was a couple
Yeah.
feet.
Yeah. It was like 4.5 foot long.
Oh my goodness. And he found that in Michigan?
Yeah. He said that he was out there hiking in those ancient Michigan mines and was just out on a hike. And he said he saw it laying the ground. He said, and like it was maybe like a foot of it or something might have been kind of partially buried, but he saw that tapered end just kind of hanging out, kind of slanted out of the rocks, and said he just walked over and just picked it right up.
Boy,
But
that
Joseph's had it sent off. He had to cut a piece of it off. He said, I hated to do it. He said, but I wanted analysis done on it. And he had it tested and had the purity of the the copper tested, had the origins of where it came from. They believed it come from like the Middle East or something like that. But he had just got back that report, and he brought that and he read off that report
mhm.
and talked about how old it was and everything in that interview. It was pretty cool.
Yeah, that's remarkable. That certainly points to people from the Middle East coming over here, possibly traveling up the Mississippi uh, in boats and mining copper.
Mhm.
Of course, they may have been doing more than that. There seems to be, I think they may have established some civilizations over here too. Somebody did. I think,
Yeah.
there's that. Well, we don't have to go into all this today, but Michigan's a very, it's just those, that whole, the Great Lakes region is just fascinating to me. I mean, the Wabanzi stone that they found that was once up in Chicago. It's in a private collection now, but it was at the mouth of one of the rivers there in Chicago where it looks like that they were making a stop and doing a sacrifice for safe passage on top of this stone and then getting back in their boat and embarking on their journey home. Just little things like that. And I think some of these
And
cities
the
over here.
petroglyph, that big petroglyph they found of a Phoenician style ship.
Yeah.
And what's cool is like the copper from that area is the purest copper in the world. It's like 98.8% pure. And it's the only place in the world that they found that pure copper. But they are finding this same purity mark copper in Europe, in the Middle East, in Africa, India, everywhere, because the Phoenicians, these ancient people, were sailing over here. And back then, the water levels were higher. They would just come in through Maine, go straight into the Great Lakes, and start mining the hell out of it. And then they just entered the Mississippi and went on down. And I think that's how they ended up in South America and Mexico and all that. And they were just traveling the world and dealing in this. That's why you had this Bronze Age explosion.
Yeah. That's one of the things that I'm most excited about is looking more into the history of the Americas, specifically North America. I think we're only going to continue to find out more interesting, untold little stories and artifacts and everything else, relics. There's there's just this untold story of the lands here, like the ground. I'm in Tennessee. Like I don't know. I think you're probably, judging by your accent, you're not far from
Well, I'm
me.
East Tennessee.
Okay.
I'm in the yeah, I'm right on the border of North
Oh,
Carolina and West Virginia. And
right on, right on. So we're both, the ground beneath our feet is just loaded with an untold story. You know, I mean, I think that this copper mine, that's a big piece of the story. I do. I think there's way more to it. I mean, the legends here in Tennessee are incredible. I mean,
yeah.
that's a whole other podcast, a
Oh,
whole other
Haywood,
episode.
you ever read into his stuff?
Haywood, not what is, I know
He's
what, go ahead. What does he do?
he was like an ancient, historian, or not ancient, but he was a long time ago. But he was from Tennessee, and he was into history and archaeology, and he was really into the mounds and the giants and stuff, and all these earthworks in Tennessee. He's definitely uh, worth looking into. And if I'm not mistaken, I think he even talks about little people,
Okay,
like
that's what I was about to
like
ask.
little people living amongst the giants, and kind of like
Yeah,
this culture.
I think maybe I have come across his name there too, because when you said Haywood, I thought about little people, because I've got a whole sack of stuff on the little people I got to go through. They were there was a mass graveyard of little people found in White County, Tennessee, and I think some of those remains ended up in Knoxville under lock and key at a museum or a university there. I'll have to look back through the documents, but I think somebody, Rick Osman, Indiana Rick, was on, and he was telling me about a guy who snuck in there and found these little people's bodies still in, I guess it was a museum. I don't remember, some sort of a vault where they got locked away. And it just kind of verified this story, but there's also all this documentation about these little people, and it's in the legends, it's in the Cherokee legends like crazy, man.
Oh
Like
yeah.
where you're, I don't know if it's right where you're at, but uh East Tennessee, that little Tennessee River that comes out of Tellico Lake that goes on up into the mountains there, that was loaded with Cherokee cities. There was just, I've got a whole list of them. There's a 7 or 8 Cherokee cities that were along that river there. When they put the dam in the late 70s, they flooded the whole thing.
Oh yeah, and they reported what was it? The Smithsonian had sent some people down there, and they were finding uh the remains of what they thought was Egyptian
Yeah.
pyramids and temples. And then they told them, "Ah, well, we're still going to build this dam and flood this valley, so you got 2 weeks to dig and find what you can." Then they flooded it.
Well, yeah, and yeah, that whole Tellico Lake region is something I'm going to be looking more into as soon as I get the chance to do it, because I've been researching other stuff right now, but it's on my list, and it's fascinating because I looked into it enough to find some names of some chiefs and some prominent Cherokee people who uh there's existing documentation on. And a lot of these guys were known to be diplomatic and civilized, and they had a system of writing. They were taking records. Cherokee were. So there's documentation, and there's all these stories about how they were friends with a lot of European people too. They actually, whenever conflict and war would break out, some of these Cherokee guys would come in and save the skin of their European friends. They would help them out. It's just a whole convoluted history that we're not told about. It's literally been buried underwater. And
Hmm.
I was reading the other day too, just to tie this in with the little people. I got a hold of a new book that goes into Cherokee legends. And I found that there was a tribe somewhere close to where Asheville is today, right there off that French Broad River. There was a
That's about
tribe.
an hour from me.
Yeah. There was a tribe there that had a legend of it was a time of war and a time of trouble. And they said that the little people came to them and offered to help them out. And they said the little people told them, you have to, if you want to come with us, you have to fast for 7 days. And then you can enter into our kingdom, essentially.
The underworld.
Underworld. So, and some of the Cherokee people apparently took them up on that, did the fast. And where they went was they went over to Pilot Mountain in North Carolina and apparently entered the earth through maybe a portal or something in Pilot Mountain. And they lived inside of this mountain with these little people. It's fascinating stuff. And
Yeah,
that
and
was
Chief
that's
Joseph, his wife, is Cherokee,
really
and in that interview, she talks about some of their legends, and she was saying that she thought, and Joseph was in agreement with her, that the Cherokee was one of the lost tribes of Israel, and she laid out all kinds of cool correlations, and even like the name, the Cherokee name of their creator uh, is Yahweh.
wow.
And like all their old songs and stuff from their original tongue, it's it's like an ancient form of Hebrew. And said how they discovered that they went to Israel on some kind of diplomatic thing, like with the nations, and that they were singing some of their native Cherokee songs,
Mm.
and that there was a Messianic Jew there that after they got done singing was like, "Oh, that was so beautiful," and you were talking about God and this and that, and but there was some stuff I couldn't pick up. So was you like saying your language and throwing some Hebrew in there? And they were like, "No, this is no, this is our language." And he was like, "Well, your name is exactly how we say." Yahweh, and started talking about all the correlations with the language and stuff. It was pretty cool.
Yeah, that's cool. I've not heard that story before, but it doesn't shock me. I've come
Yeah, it's on that
across.
interview.
I'm gonna read. I wrote it down here. I'm gonna be listening to that with Chief Joseph, Riverwind.
Yeah, it's called
S-
The Talking Leaves.
Okay,
Is the name of the
nice.
episode.
Yeah, there was some stuff I came across too. It's been a while, but Montauk Point up there, the very tip of Long Island, is a very interesting place. Uh, it's come up in some of my Nazi research as well, because I think some of the paperclip Nazis got stationed there at Montauk. There was an old base there. I'm trying. Yeah, I think it's called Montauk Point. But anyway, before all that, there used to be a stone out there, some sort of an edifice that apparently had Hebrew language etchings. And of course, that's long gone. You know how this stuff does; it just disappears.
Hmm.
Anything
Now,
that
is that the
tells,
one? It's like a rounded rectangle stone with it had like a priest or something in the center that had all that writing around the edge.
maybe I
I
never
remember
saw a
reading
picture of
something
it.
about that. That it was like I don't know if it was a picture or an artist rendition, but they were
Okay.
saying that it was this stone they found and it had this ancient form of Hebrew, and that it was basically the Ten Commandments
Mm-hmm.
around the edge that they had found
I
somewhere here in North America.
It may have been an obelisk-like stone, I think, if I remember that correctly. There's a couple of these stones out there that go missing. There was one that was found in West Virginia that had Iberian Phoenician on it.
Yeah. In Iberian, what it called Punic.
Yeah.
Up there in America's Stonehenge, they found what they call the Bale Stone, and that a lot of the solar alignments they have line up with Beltane, and
Like
that's a
Baal,
Phoenician thing.
like
Yeah,
Baal. Yeah.
yeah. And then this stone, Barry Fell from Harvard University went up there and studied this stone they found, and that it was like a form of Iberian Punic and like ancient Phoenician writing. And on there it said, uh, to Baal of the Canaanites, in whom we make dedication. So it's showing you, like the people that built America's Stonehenge were Baal worshiping Phoenicians.
Yeah. Yeah. It ties right. It ties into this conversation we had today as well, because I think that the Nephilim kind of got into some of those groups like the Canaanites and the Phoenicians.
Oh, they were. That's who they were.
Yeah.
I think that when Josh and Caleb and the boys went in there to clean house and retake the Holy Land, the smart ones jumped on their ships and got the hell out of there. They even found a standing pillar. I can't remember exactly where it's at. It's out there in the Mediterranean somewhere. I think it's at the tip of Africa. But there was ancient Phoenician writing, and it said, "We the Phoenicians lay claim to this land because of Joshua, the great robber, who ran us out of our lands."
Yeah. It's yeah, it's crazy that that story keeps popping up for me too. This idea that these people were driven out of the Holy Land, out of the Middle East. Just they went all over, and like
Hmm.
I'll touch on this too probably when I do your show. Um, I'll wait to touch on it then. That way I can hit it with my hardest punch. But I will
And
say
for those
this.
that don't know, we're doing this all over again tomorrow night, but
Yeah,
on my show.
yeah, that's right. It's funny you said Barry Fell. I think that's the guy who snuck into this archive, this museum, and found these little people skeletons. I'm pretty sure that's the
Hmm.
same guy.
It
That
probably was. He was like the first Maverick.
yeah, he's legendary.
Oh yeah. Where's it at? Right here.
You know, it's wild too. It's like here in Tennessee, you've got all these references to Greece as well. America, did he write that?
Yeah, Barry Fell.
Okay, okay, cool. I got to get that book, man.
Yep.
Nice.
America BC,
That's
and see he's drawing all these travel routes
yeah.
from the Middle East and Africa straight into the Americas.
All right, I'm gonna get that book. That looks awesome. But even like there's all this other there's like there's Greek influence over here too that I found specifically in Tennessee. You've got in White County, Tennessee, where those little people were found, the center of that county is a place called Sparta. And you've got Athens, and then you've got here in Nashville, you've got a 48-foot statue of Athena in a
Yeah.
Parthenon. It's like, what? There's this whole untold history here.
Yeah.
I've not heard a good
Yeah.
reason for that statue of Athena to be here either. They say they put it in there in the late 1800s for the Centennial Expo, which was like this World's Fair event that ran
Hmm.
for like a couple of months. And I know,
Yeah,
who
like a
knows?
veneration type thing.
Yeah. But it just seems like it's older, and it seems like even if they did put that statue of Athena in the 1800s, it seems like they did it for a purpose, as if to say, uh, yeah, we're Nashville, we're the place, where all this old Greek stuff was found, old Greek, old Greek vases and all kinds of stuff here. I've got an old article that talks about a sarcophagus being found in a tunnel under Nashville. So there was some sort of an
Yeah.
ancient
Well, they
civilization
all
here.
were.
Yeah.
I believe in, the, what they call it, diffusionism. A lot of people want to say it's, the ancient people were isolationists, that they formed their little groups and they were too afraid to get out and venture. But look at just people like me and you. Yeah, there's people that want to just stick to the 66 book canon and believe what their pastor tells them. But then there's people like us, man, that we know there's more out there and we
Uh-huh.
go looking for it. And a lot of people are built that way. And they were like, I know everybody says the earth's flat and I'm going to fall off the edge, but I think I want to find out for myself. And those are the ones that discovered this whole new world,
Yeah.
and gold and copper, and those are the ones that become the wealthiest people in the world because they were brave enough and adventurous enough to go out and explore this place. And those people are not confined to one people group or one nation. I mean, you have people like that in every people group, every nation, every time. And those people were traveling the world. And that's why you have pyramids throughout the world. That's why you have snake imagery throughout the world, why you found all this Egyptian stuff out in the Grand Canyon. And that's why the mythos in a lot of places are so similar, just different caveats and details added because there was people traveling the world and sharing their ideas and traditions with other people, and their gods came with them.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. That's a good place to end it. That's a good sum up of everything. I couldn't have said it better myself, man. This has been great. I've been looking forward to this interview. Uh, it didn't disappoint. It was a lot of fun. I knew it was going to be great. I mean, I've heard you before. I know that you do your homework and that you approach research with a very serious tone. I mean, you look for answers. That's what I mean by that,
Mhm.
and you find them. So and I can definitely appreciate that. And thanks for coming on. Tell everybody where they can find you.
Oh yeah, man. And Tim, thank you. I definitely enjoyed this conversation because that's what I love. I love conversations. I love coming on with somebody that's just as passionate about history and these things like I am, because nobody has it all figured out. We all have pieces to the puzzle. So, we might not agree 100% with most people, but you still have to have dialogue with those people because they might have that one missing piece that you need to get your full picture. So having this talk, and this is exchanging of puzzle pieces, and I love it. So I love having these conversations. And you've uh, actually taught me some things tonight and got me wanting to scratch and look into some other stuff. So I appreciate that. But yeah, guys, if you like this, conversation we had, I'm doing them every single week. Uh, we release on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, anywhere you can consume content. Shows drop Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. On Monday, we always have a live premiere and a live chat. We have the same group of people come hang out and we just talk with each other and have really good fellowship. And I've kind of coined the show the hero's journey, and kind of base it off, Plato and the allegory of the cave, and that's what that lit up sign and my logo is. It's the guy standing in there behind the flame, looking at the shadows on the wall. And so I asked people, "Are you ready to leave the cave?" you know, we have to take this hero's journey. You got to go into the unknown. You have to slay the dragon. You have to rescue the damsel, but you come out on the other end as a hero, and you have this boon, this prize of great wealth, which is the knowledge in which Jesus says, "My people suffer from lack of." But then your journey's not over with. You come back to civilization. You share that prize of great wealth with others around you, and then you start that hero's journey for them. You become the wise old man that gives the prize of great wealth to someone else starting their hero's journey. And I just want to get a bunch of people together because I'm on the hero's journey too. And we need to lock arms and get as many people with us to go and have our backs. And more eyes you have on something, the better off you're going to be at finding your puzzle pieces. So come on over, hang out with us, man, on the hero's journey. Prometheus Lens podcast, all social medias, all content. Just search us up and you should be able to find us.
Yeah, excellent. I'll be leaving a link to Justin's show directly below in the description. Go check out what he has to offer. You won't be disappointed. And as always, break the mold, conquer the realm, and thanks for listening.